So explain to us how political drinking works.
Well, you sit down at like 3 p.m. with a bunch of hacks. And the key to it is you have to be with a center of the political universe. In this case, a very, very influential former governor. And what happens is, as the dozens of people who want to kiss the ring sidle up to the bar, it's just this cycle of round of people of stories. One guy's pitching a bridge project, the other guy's pitching a movie production deal, another guy's pitching a book. It's just this constant amount of and then of course there are all the flies around you are the PR guys, and the press bounces in and out, and it's just like
The Big Sell Illuminati, where some of the best in the business discuss what's worked, what's working, and what's failed in selling big sales. Our panel of experts includes Clarity Seeker, a black belt of brands, our snarky marketer, Monique de Maio. CEO to CEO selling is his game. Fortune 500 in his lane. The Lex Luthor of the close, Mark Kennedy. The effective executive, a force on the boards, a buyer on fire, Tiffany Olson. David versus Goliath selling, the prince of process, Sun Tzu of big sales strategy, Tom Searcy. And that's your panel. Now it's time to talk about big sales.
Welcome, everybody, to the Big Sale Illuminati podcast. I'm so grateful that we had the opportunity to talk to you a little bit today about selling the future state. Now, the buyer on fire, our very own Tiffany Olson, was not able to join us today, but we wish her well. And it may go better because we don't have anybody to tell us we're wrong. So
fact checking is allowed on today's show.
No fact checking is necessary. The thing is that when you're selling the future, we know that as salespeople, we get paid to sell the future. Whatever our customer is, whoever they are, whatever size company, individual, whatever, they buy something because they believe that the future will be better than their current situation. Maybe it's incrementally, maybe it's exponentially, but it doesn't matter. They're buying the future state. So we're going to talk about that today. And I kind of want to open up and then get a lot of help from Mark today. There's a level that people meet that we would call interest. They're interested in what you have to say. And then there's this threshold called change, where the interest has to get to a certain level before they'll make the change. And there's a lot of time and energy spent talking to people who are interested, who you cannot reach their threshold of change. Interesting statistic, and this one goes back a few years, but the change inside of industrial was 8 to 14%. There had to be an 8% to 14% net lift for an organization to make change. Now, the world has changed around that. A couple of things is that there was a certain price for money at that time, that we have a higher price for money. Secondly, when we look at the returns that are being asked for out there based upon investments and acquisitions and et cetera, those go up. Also, you have to pick the industries. Industries like technology are expecting when they sell something, someone who buys it is looking for a net lift in their overall financial performance, et cetera, that is more significant. However, I still hold on to that idea that there is a threshold that you have to achieve that breaks through the level of interest to the level of actually making change. And we find that people don't do it. People get interested and they think that they've got a deal. They just put that in the deal column and four most dangerous words out there, darn near done deal. And they just, and then the second four most dangerous words out there, it could be huge. That's where the salespeople go out there and they've got a hold of interest, and then we can't get the close. So I want to turn over this to Mark to kind of give a little bit of thoughts. First of all, I kind of threw out a lot of stuff there. Anybody, before we jump into this our show, questions?
No, it definitely, something that you said that jarred a thought for me that just happened to me recently, which is when you talk about the, for lack of a better term, productivity improvement you need in corporate to justify a change. I think one of the really important and counterintuitive things is you have to be careful about too much. Even if your reality is more. You have to be really careful because promising too much, it's not that you can't deliver it. It's that you have an administration that's in place. People have made decisions that have led them to where they are that day. And if you come in with something that's dramatically better and it's going to change the perception of the people who made those original decisions, it will destabilize your deal in a second. So the balancing act, or one of the important balancing, and I had this happen to me recently. I came in, we had a really strong program for an iconic brand. The way they had been going about the process of acquiring new customers was historically expensive. Right now, TV spots and radio spots and digital it's at an all-time high in terms of the price per impression or per 1,000 impressions of CPM. And these guys had just fallen right into the old track of doing what they were doing. And we came in with something fundamentally different, fundamentally better. And we gave them the real numbers, and it literally was going to cause significant reputational damage to the people who'd gotten to that point. So we actually had to back off the numbers and make them worse, even though the actual program in hindsight is performing. And I can't help that.
Well, and there's always the risk, right? They're bringing you in for the failures of the past, except they have to carry the image that of what's going on right now, like they're the idiots. And my answer is no. The prior administration were idiots. Right now, I'm living with your old iron or your own digital contracts or your own whatever, and set my performance. That's why I brought these guys in. And their bosses look at them and say, well, you're supposed to fix that. And you're like, I just brought this guy in to fix this.
Even if you're dealing at the top of the organization, and we do deal at the top of organizations, the adjacencies are the ones that are going to second guess what they've been doing in the past when the new thing is so much remarkably better. So I think that's like graduate level selling the future state, because you have to create a scenario where the existing administration can save face either vertically in the organization or adjacency.
I've experienced that unless there's been a major turnover inside of that department. So you're right. The promise has to be big enough that said, we're looking at returns that will get you to this level, and there's a floor of returns that will be no less than this. And in doing that, you give them a range for change. They can say, okay, I'm interested in what you have to say, but now I see what the performance looks like that. Monique, what are you thinking before we toss ourselves to Mark the Lion today?
No, I agree. I think inertia is a very powerful force. Personally, I think people are afraid of change. I think that they don't want to be the ones to sign on the deal that upsets the status quo. So if somebody like Mark is coming into organizations like the ones I work with, I can see an immediate fear, even though it's compelling because it's almost too good to be true.
It's getting to that spot that's near the middle. They look like a hero because they brought you in. They don't look like a fool because they brought you in.
I would really think we should unpack how you've been able to to specifically do that with people in a room where half of them are posturing to keep their jobs and the other ones are posturing to make you either the hero or the villain, depending on how it goes.
Well, I mean, I can answer this, and Mark might want to join in. I would tell you that I've used 3 techniques to help companies when they're looking at what look like extraordinary claims from my company, and it's almost too good to be true. And the number one of those is the ramp in. So we said, we're going to start off at this particular level, and we're going to ramp in the utilization of what we do as a company with your company, with the expectation that current state looks at this level, and when we get to future state, it'll be in a range like this. But along the way, it'll be in the range that you can tolerate, and then we'll get to this future range, which is much higher, but not out of control. So the first step is to ramp in, and the ramping in sometimes is just their ability to see performance without feeling overwhelmed by it. The second thing is to say market changes of implementations like this have ranges of performance that can be as extraordinary as this much. I'm not saying it's going to be that big. I'm saying for you to really feel comfortable in your market relevant range looks like this. And yet you're hearing this term range because hard dollar promises are very, very dangerous because there's always the internal, as you said, inertia of your client. All right. And the third thing is that we said your performance will run at the speed of your operational implementation. I don't know how big your performance improvement can get. I can tell you right now, implementation will get you somewhere near this standard, but your improvement will be set by the implementation of your company. So those are three ways in which I deal with that idea of overcoming resistance to benefit points that seem extraordinary.
Yeah. So Tom's change model is spot on and absolutely imperative for helping an organization go through the type of change necessary. What I would actually say is, to answer your question, Monique, I don't deal with that room. I don't deal with big rooms. I deal with small rooms. So before that whole conversation happens, there is a conversation that happens with someone who's responsible for market share, who's responsible for generating EBITDA, whatnot. And that's the person that, without that endorsement, I never sell up. I go from up and down. So where I've gotten into situation, and by the way, when I was younger in my career, I thought you could go to a director in one of these Fortune 500 companies and you could convince them that your whiz-bang program was the greatest thing on earth, and they would take it to the VP, and the VP would eventually take it to the C-suite, and you would sell a deal, and that's the pathway to free consulting. You will be educating people about what's going on outside of their business and in the broader industry forever, and you'll never earn a commission check. Instead, and I tell it to the people I work with. So the way our sales model works is it's executive sponsorship first, foremost, and that's the ultimate plug for Tom's book, because that's where the work happens. So that executive language that we use and selling to those executive buyers, it makes the sales process a little bit unusual because you spend a lot of your time trying to get that 30-minute meeting with the person in the right frame of mind who's ready to hear and can be receptive to what you're selling, which is why your language has got to be spot on. But the point about creating a change of threshold throughout the organization, I've got a whole crew of people that are trained about their role to help an organization go through change, but it's a fait accompli. It's once the executive intent has been defined, then and only then do we unleash the hordes of change folks and project managers and subject matter experts and technical specialists and that whole throng.
Well, we're gonna spend time on just one single episode on executive intent, because I think that we could spend a lot of time, but executive intent is the primary cause. And for those folks who didn't catch it, Mark was referring to the book called The Secret to Big Sales, the most recent book that came out. Mark made the reference. I wouldn't bring up the title if it hadn't been for Mark's reference.
Oh, how sweet.
So, yeah, thank you, Mark, for the shameless plug.
You just ooze integrity, I got to tell you.
Listen, I declare I'm completely transparent. Monique, you were making a good point, and Mark and I made a muck of it.
I would and let me just kind of summarize it like this. I think there are two levels of fear or two levels of anxiety, as you might call it, in change. There's the fear of changing, and then there's the fear if I don't change. What I try to do, and this is no joke, explicitly inside of a sale, is the first fear of change I take care of with the C-suite. After that decision's been made, the fear of not changing is the fear of the C-suite basically the fear of that the C-suite isn't going to believe in the program. So I get executive sponsorship to basically push the entire organization through the fear of change into the fear of not changing.
So if you're in the professional services business, like Monique and I are in professional services business, there's a third element of change, or a third element of choice. It's that senior organization's belief. Their fear is, can my organization pivot? Do they have the resources, the mentality, the mindset, the energy, or whatever to implement? So that's a third fear that's in the buyer's mind.
I don't know. I think I disagree with that. I think for me, that fear is, I have to take that fear off the table because I'm still dealing with the fear of changing with the C-suite. I have to get through that with that buyer, because the elements are going to be this. What you're really hitting on is you're hitting on the executive intent, the battle between the juice and the squeeze, right?
Yes.
The juice is easy. I can come bearing fruits of juice all day long. I can talk about return on ad spend and return on marketing spend that'll blow away almost every channel that they've got. But where they're going to turn to me is go, okay, Smarty, how do you go to this party? What about maybe, can I change? What's it going to do to my IT stack? What does it do for my website? What does it do for my personnel? Can my writers keep up with the volume? What about my compliance team? They've never pumped through that much content at a given time. Like, there's a whole bunch of different no's in there that I have to get them through. And once they get to the point where I've shown them case studies and I've given them the chance to do pilots, and I've had them do reference calls, and I've, all the things with, organizations at least as complicated as theirs, that's how I get them through that first one. And then once they've chosen, the rest of the organization falls into the, thou shalt do this new thing or else. And then things like, that's how you deal with change. Otherwise, people are never going to change because no one wants to really change.
Knowing that you still have had organizations in which you've got what I refer to as the eels, and the eels in the grass who come in and they sabotage a deal either by passively or aggressively. And so even if you get the executive sponsor with executive intent, you have to keep them in the deal longer than the purchase to continue to move forward. When I signed this deal, I really meant it. And when I said we were all going to get in a line, I really meant it. So they have to push that energy all the way through, or what happens is you lose your executive spots. I feel like I cut you off, Monique. Go ahead.
No, that's not at all. I actually wanted you to unpack the eel in the deal because I think it's part of your curriculum that I've read, and it's the gal that's sabotaging a deal. We're not exactly sure why. Sometimes they have very weird intents, but how do you deal with that, right? How do you deal with the eel quickly in the context of Mark's, structure of selling the future state?
The first thing you do is you try and co-op your eel by getting them educated as to why it's a benefit to them, right? Because you'd rather have somebody in there who understands. The second thing you've got with the eel is you try to make the noise around them louder than their voice, which means there's a bunch of people around them that are supportive of trying to do this, and their voices about wanting to do this become louder than the single eels. And so because you've got people that are in the team, they want to do this and et cetera, you pull them into an opera of conversations, lots of meetings, lots of interactions, and et cetera, all of them positive. You go to your third is that you go to your executive sponsor and say, I think I've got a person who maybe is slowing down the implementation process, and I need your assistance in moving that implementation process out. And the fourth one is you kill them. You just go to your executive sponsor and say, this person needs to step out of this work group. They need to step into a different work group because this work group won't be successful if we've got the other person operating in it. We're just not getting efficiency. And so those are the four ways that I go after eels. There are a couple that are on the dark web that I don't like to talk about. Cryptocurrency will buy you a lot. Anyway, so those four methods have been for me successfar.
Is it true that you keep a shovel and a bag of lime in the trunk of your car?
No, I include a tarp. I have a tarp, a shovel, and a bag of lime.
I want to understand the bag of lime, but I don't know if we have time for that.
The lime keeps the animals away because of the smell and etc. If that was important for you to know. Off topic, and I'm glad we had a chance to talk a little bit because I think that this idea, I think everybody actually faces this idea of having to make too big a claim or not understanding what's the threshold of enough claim. And so they go out there and we start to make the unnecessary, or more importantly, we don't put a range on the claim. We say, people have seen significant benefits from this. This means 80% benefits. That is a terrible claim. If you say organizations like yours typically can expect between 8 and 16% overall net improvement over the course of the first 90 days. Improvements go up from there. Installation occurs. You should be expecting higher returns by the end of the year. That's a reasonable statement to make because you're talking about net improvements, because you're talking about a period of time. It also says that your investment in, say, the onboarding or initial work and et cetera, is going to be perceived as far as the revenue, because the revenue that comes in to offset the cost, you're going to look like you're losing revenue, or you're going to look like you're costing more. And it doesn't matter whether you're selling a tractor for John Deere, or whether there's a cycle time through which the investment then provides a higher level of return. And if you're not honest about that, and you believe that the return comes from $1, you're dealing with an immature or unsophisticated buyer.
So the buyer, I want to hear from you guys. How do you put that person personally in the future state? Do you play that? Do you play that card? Like, let me paint the picture of what your life would be, Mr. Executive Sponsor, in this perfect scenario. When you sign our deal, this is what happens to you. Or how do you navigate the personality thing?
I'll take the first part of it. So the answer is yes. And there's a number of different dimensions to it. I mean, I think it transcends emotional, personal, logical, financial, and it has to be aligned with their business. So what we do and what I do, it's actually why I love running the business I've got right now, which is we're very specific about future projections of success. Like, we will literally, down to the dollar, either the number of customers acquired, the number of units sold on a per month basis, we give rolling 2-year projections. We will literally take a performance channel and project out the success based off of a heuristic data model that we've developed that's proprietary. And we're very close to that. Like, we get within a very tight control range of what we forecast. That gives a fair degree of certainty, because you can judge us against an objective, I would say an objective standard, but it's a standard that we're providing about how the program's performing. And when you look at it from a marketing return on either ad spend or marketing spend, that almost always falls within the boundaries of what they look for. And from what I've seen in depending on the gross margins of the underlying companies, anywhere from a 3 to a 5x return on spend is about what they'll get into, at least from, to get a little bit technical, from a last click attribution perspective. So what we do in terms of painting that future is giving them that very specific thing, or that very specific target that they can get confidence around. But then we deal with what it's going to mean for them. Both, you think about the emotional side of making this change. Like, what is this going to mean for this executive and this executive's career? Because, I mean, I know we're going to get into this in a little bit, although it's funny, this show is running we're bumping right along, but we're talking about the different types of future that we sell. So, incremental, transformational, and then the undiscovered side of the future. When I'm working on a deal right now that is going to be transformational. So big box retailer, solidly in second market position behind the established leader. And the CMO came to me and said, it through a client referral, and said, "We've been second forever. We've always been second. Is there anything I can do to get to first?" And we looked at the numbers and we looked at the data, and we came back and said, "Yeah, it's going to cost a Brinks truckload of money, and away we go. And it's going to cost a Brinks truckload full of money. And here's the path to success. And it's going to take you a couple of years. But yeah, the answer is yes. And here's how we're going to do it." So that type of a transformational sale, she's literally trying to make her mark. And what's, the thing too that I don't know if, and not to get off topic, but the thing you have to, I always talk about executive intent, and I talk a lot about selling to the C-suite and getting that direction right. But one thing you have to understand too is, and I'm very attuned to this, is I am responsible for a number of people's careers. That is not lost on me. There are a handful of guys that are using me, guys and men and women that are using me to get to the next thing in their life. Like one of my favorite executive sponsors is going to be the next big time CEO on Wall Street. And he's using our programs to transform the way his business works, to demonstrate that he can do that to basically the next of the next stop on his chain. And there are a number of people like that. So this transformative deal for this big box retailer is similar. This is what this chief marketing officer is going to do to basically put a stamp on the map and say, "I took down XYZ company." And it's awesome, but there is a lot of responsibility.
I think that piece of selling the future that you're talking about right now, and the future state, as you're talking about it, Monique, has to be not just what you're going to get, but how safe the journey will be in getting there. that's what changes in part the belief set, meaning that, look, you're going to get there and you can trust that it's going to be in these particular numbers. Because for the most part, for the things that we talk, you're buying blind. You've got a lot of assurances, but you write a lot of checks before you get to the result that's been promised. And so we use a set of phrases that says you get sent to whom you sound like. You stay with those people who are intrigued and impressed, and you close and grow with those people who believe. And so I think that last part of speed to money, speed to close, speed to implementation has to do with, do they believe? What's the safety level that they've got then on the opposite side of it? And a lot of times what we do is we get really good on the first part. This is what it is. This is what it looks like. This is how long it's going to last, and et cetera. And there isn't that part that says, and oh, by the way, I'm not going to screw you later. I'm not just trying to get my commission check. I'm not trying to hit my monthly quota. I'm not trying to hit the annual budget. This is a true deal. I think the safety requirement, I don't see enough time and energy put into proposals, put into conversations and presentations to make people feel like they can take that jump, especially in both your cases. Mark's case right now, lots of big dollars involved in that, which you get big organizations, they move very cautiously.
Methodically.
Glacially. How much data do you need? Whatever you've got, I need 10% more.
Well, I mean, what's crazy too, though, Tom, as you know, is these days, even when you have sold the future, even when you've painted a picture of a better and brighter tomorrow and you've got an executive intent, there is still the organizational machine that you have to navigate. Like, I literally just went in, got the buy-in, moved in the direction, and still had to go through an RFP process, still had to deal with procurement, still have to do a vendor onboarding. Like, all of that is real. I mean, that doesn't go away. And I think some of that's lost on folks. I know there is a certain guy on the podcast that wrote a book called RFPs Suck. And he's exactly right. They do suck, but they suck a little less when you're out in front of them and you've influenced the organization to move in that direction, and they've got compliance requirements that they need multiple bids. In which case, you and I have fought about this for days and weeks about even some of the deals that I'm currently doing, and it's just it's a reality of the fact that the churn in these organizations, they've just got to get aligned. Now, the good news is when you get through the back end of this and they've beaten you 15 ways to Sunday with procurement, and you are in and you're aligned, you're hard to get rid of.
This is so true. We sold to a huge company, and we wound up getting as an approved vendor. Almost all of our competitors just died at the front door because they said, I'm sorry, we already have an approved vendor for that. And they're like, well, we want to be an approved vendor. Like, honestly, we've got one. And they just died. No one would let them in the door. And I was like, it's like one of those things, like, you feel like, you're Mission Impossible and you snuck in and somehow you did that. And then after that, you're locked up. Well, I think you were going to jump in.
No, I was going to say, I think the listeners on the call are going to be all about what Mark just said, but I think the concern is if you're leading the charge and you're the one setting the standard for the RFP, that could be dangerous too, because then you have the copycats trying to eat your lunch. So how do you navigate that? Like being first in, dictating the process on the RFP, and then what does that look like?
Well, with 5 minutes left in the show, you've asked a question that we could write an entire book on. But what I'll say is you have to show them something during that process that they're just not going to get somewhere else. That's the thing. There has to be something about what you're doing that has to be demonstrably different than what they're going to see. Because anybody can come in and say, we can do this because our prices are going to be high. We charge a lot for what we do because it's worth it. What we do differently than anyone else is we have the audacity to predict outcomes and take on the basically the dysfunction that's in both our client's organization and in the organization that I have. And everyone goes, oh my God, you said your company's dysfunctional. We are 100% dysfunctional. Every group of human beings alive that work together have dysfunction. This podcast has dysfunction and at times dissension. So anyway, so what we do is we have the audacity to take on a problem that most organizations can't or won't. So when we take that problem on, it changes the language that goes into the RFP. And then when people respond in either a deliverable or a charge for the hour basis, what they're doing sounds markedly different than ours, which makes it easier for procurement to actually go, okay, even though these guys are more expensive, we should go in this direction. And then you have the C-suite going, listen, I'm putting this in my, by the way, this is, if you want to get to the promised land, this is the important thing. Get your executive sponsor to commit the productivity into their operating budget. If you can get to that point, you're in, and you will hardly ever get out as long as you can deliver.
So this right here, this is what Mark said that you could unpack either quickly or slowly. And it's just simply what I call land mining the RFP. You can either do it before the RFP gets released. You can do it right at the point the RFP is there, or you can do it at the point of screening the RFPs. And what it is that you put in the must-haves of anyone who is participating in that RFP, and you're land mining those must-haves. Mark just talked about productivity that the executive sponsor is going to set in. It says it has to be at least this much. There's other people that says you can only use those people that have got this kind of technology platform that they're operating on, or whatever it is. You have to come up with 3 or 4 things that you say, look, I'm not saying that you got to buy from me. I'm just saying whoever you buy from needs to have these 3 things, or you shouldn't buy from them. Tiffany was on the call today. She would talk about 3 things on her biggest deal that she got worked into the RFP that killed off 16 out of the 20 competitors, and then killed off 2 more. And so she was fighting 2 competitors. And why was that? She totally pivoted what the RFP looked like. And by doing that, she eliminated so many competitors because the landmine said, these folks don't have at a baseline level what's necessary. You've got to figure out what is the baseline thing that's necessary that you have uniquely. Well, we dove deep into, I would say, a really important topic. Mark was going to assist us, and so where we dove in deep, we dove shallow into his agenda.
This might be a mini series instead of an episode.
I think so. A good session. Good to see everybody, and we'll see you for our next episode. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Big Sell Illuminati podcast. If you like this episode, give us a thumbs up and let us know in the comments. Also, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're listening on. Until our next episode, best wishes on your big sales.